One thing I wanted to do that I think would be very, very different, and I've never really seen it done before at a conference, was to kind of give a keynote talking through what inspired me to get to this theme, right? And so I'm going to tell you guys a story and take you on a journey. And it's a very personal journey, but it's also a journey that represents the theme of the conference. And, you know, it was just about a little over 4 years ago that really no one in the software testing industry knew my name or knew about me. And actually, they really didn't even know about Ultimate Software, which is the company that I came to work for. And I look at that now and I look at today, and it's quite different. You know, I've traveled all over the world, and I've gone places, and I've met people that, you know, later on I see their posts on social media and like, today was the best day of my life, I got to meet Tariq King. And I'm like, what is going on? The world must be upside down. And now the community also knows about Ultimate Software. And I really wanted to share a little bit about that journey, because to me, my background was a little bit different. I actually started off in academia, which is why no one in the software testing industry would really know me. And I was a professor for a few years. And then I made the decision to come out of academia and join the software industry. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of doubt, a lot of worry, a lot of fear built inside. Like, would I be good enough for this job? You know, here I am going into a company and I don't have much industry experience. I think I worked for IBM for a few months as a part of an internship, but I really didn't have a lot of experience. But I was going into this because of my background and my doctorate. I was going into this as a test architect, so a relatively senior person. But I wasn't senior in the company. I was just senior on paper, right? And, you know, I think we all have a little bit of imposter syndrome when you start to think about it. And I remember sitting in my new hire orientation, listening to our CTO at the time, Adam Rogers, now our co-CTO. And going into Ultimate was great. They have a good culture, people first culture. But I was more concerned about my career move, right? Like, it's great, I want to be happy at work, that's all fine. But did I make the right career move after spending so long studying the field of software testing and now moving into this company? And at the time, Adam presented something that I thought was quite remarkable. He presented this equation during our new hire orientation. And mind you, this wasn't a new hire for just engineers. This was a general new hire for anyone who joined the company. And he comes up and he presents this equation that Q equals P. So I guess you're wondering what this stands for. Q stands for what? Quality. There we go. But what's the P? Profit? No. People? No. Productivity. Quality equals productivity. And as we know from our basic mathematics, I know we don't like math sometimes, but we always know that whatever happens on one side of an equation happens to the other side. So that means that if quality increases, what he was saying is that from his perspective and from the perspective of his leadership team, productivity also increases. On the converse, if it goes down, then productivity declines. And when he said that, I said, I know that I've joined the right company. Because usually half the battle is actually trying to convince management and trying to give them that perspective, that value on what we do and what we bring to the table. And if the CTO is proclaiming this at new hire orientation to everyone that comes in the company, whether you're a developer, tester, marketing, it doesn't matter, then I feel like that's half of the battle there. And so the story that I'm going to tell you is really going to start with Inspire. And because inspiration is one of those things that is sort of like a drop in water that has this ripple effect that goes for miles and miles. And so it was about 4 years in, 3 to 4 years into my tenure at Ultimate, and I had been a test architect for a while, and I had got to a point where I felt comfortable doing what I was doing. And all of a sudden, I got an invite to go to the Boca Beach Resort, or Boca Beach Club. And it was like one of those situations where I wasn't quite sure why I got invited, because I was still a test architect. I wasn't a leader of any sort. So I get in my car and I drive from Western Florida up to the Boca Beach Resort, and just about a 45-minute drive, not a big deal. But I really didn't have very many expectations. I just felt like, okay, let's go and see what's gonna go on. I get there, it's a beautiful resort, so that's great. I mean, we're in South Florida, so you have to enjoy that while you can. I used to live in Fargo, North Dakota, so I know a little bit about climate change. And as we get there, Adam and his CSO, Julie, are just introducing the retreat. Apparently this resort was someplace that they went to for a long time. Adam's family used to go there as a child, and I was just pretty excited. Like, here I am hanging out with the CTO and all the big guys, but I still didn't know why I was there, right? Like, I just couldn't figure it out. But they were having a leadership summit. And part of that leadership summit was really about inspiring us as what I didn't know was upcoming leaders. They were looking towards me to become a manager in this company. And I don't know about you guys, but at that time, like, I felt like being an architect, that was a beautiful thing, because I got to tell people what to do and stuff, and I had power, but I didn't have to worry about all the other problems that come along with being a people manager, right? I didn't have to worry about your personal life and your PTO and your illnesses and all this stuff. So I was like, I don't know about this leadership thing, and then I was like worried, the technical side that I love and all the testing practices, is that stuff gonna go away? And there was just a lot of stuff going through my mind. But something cool happened, something very cool happened there that I couldn't anticipate. How many people have heard of right to left thinking? Have you ever heard of that? Right to left, a few people? So this was one of the things that they brought at that leadership summit. And what happens is that, like, normally we think about things from left to right. In other words, like, if we're over here, we're in our past, and we kind of walk towards the future thinking about our past to make decisions and trying to help us guide our future, right? We think about our past experiences, and really and truly what that leads to is a little bit of guidance by fear, right? Like, we think about our past, and then the bad things that happen, you don't want to make those mistakes again, and you're kind of focused on that past. But this idea was, instead of thinking left to right, let's start in the future, right? Let's start in the future and imagine that future. Pretend that we are already standing in that future, and let that feeling, like that we've conquered whatever it is we're trying to reach, guide and motivate our actions. So instead of letting the past dictate, you let that promise of that future, pretend that you've attained that future, and then go from there, and then let the rest unfold. So this blew my mind. I never thought about this before, never heard about it. I thought it was great. And I'm a movie fan, so to me it was just like, okay, let's get in the car. Let's get in the car and go to the future. And my boss came and asked me a little bit about what I thought testing was going to be like in the future. And I said, well, you know what? I think in the future, those machines that we have, the software that we have, is going to be able to test itself, and we won't have to do a lot to get it all validated and get our quality practices going, which means that we would become very, very efficient. Because we all know that testing and quality engineering accounts for about 50 to 70% of the cost of development. It's like the most expensive part of development, right? And if the machines are testing themselves, then great. So I had to basically imagine myself in that future where the machines are already doing that, and then try to let that feeling drive and guide my actions, right? And so I did what I called going back to the future, right? In other words, I went way forward, and then I said, let me go 2 steps back to the future, still future, and kind of feel what was happening at that moment, which was 2018, right? Because it was 2015 at the time, so I was still in the future. And started thinking, like, a lot of this stuff that I had been studying, because when I was in graduate school, I studied and focused on trying to build systems that can test themselves. And there's a lot of challenges with that type of a system. And at the time, there was just no great solution. But lo and behold, this whole idea of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we start to see some breakthroughs. And therefore, some of those breakthroughs allowed us to really step into that future and realize some of those challenges and overcome them. And so my whole thing to my boss, my pitch, was that we already have self-testing software, because software is smarter. It can configure itself, it can heal itself, it can protect itself, but to be able to do all that stuff, it needs to be able to test itself, right? Because that's very dynamic behavior. And we've built these agents, these bots, that can go along and do testing by themselves. Now, I didn't know why my boss was asking me this, but this is what I came up with, and I came back to him with. And so, 2016 hits, and Ultimate Software wanted to invest in the future of testing. I mean, that was exciting. But again, I felt that that stemmed from our culture, that Q equals P. What a great culture to have, that here's a company saying, we don't just want to invest in quality now, we want to invest in quality in the future. And right now, testing is very focused on doing manual things, right? We have this manual effort. We talked about it last year, where we're doing a lot of either manual exploratory testing, where the human is involved, or even when we talk about automation, we're doing this scripting, but it's all very manual. It's not very automated at all. And so let's have a grand vision where we're focused on testing with minimal human intervention. You see, I was inspired by that discussion on right-to-left thinking. I was thrilled. And now, everything that I learned in that workshop was coming into fruition in my role as a test architect. I had forgotten all about this manager thing that maybe might happen. I was just happy to be applying what I learned at this leadership summit to my field, right? And so we went on a moonshot. We got money to shoot for the moon. We got money to try to have a team focused on trying to solve this testing problem. It sounds very crazy because it is. That's why you call it a moonshot. And whenever you go on a mission like this, the first thing that you wonder is there anyone else going to the moon with me? Like, is anyone else shooting for the moon? And so, as a good doctoral student would, I remembered my roots. I was always going to have that with me. I said, well, before we start doing anything, let's search and see who's doing what. And so I found some companies. And this is nothing against these companies, but at the time, the more I talked to them about this stuff, it just seemed like they didn't understand some of the core challenges of testing that needed to be solved to do a moonshot project like this. And if you didn't understand the problem, how were you going to solve it? And so I was really disappointed when I started. This is 2016. They had some startups. Here we were trying to do this as part of our HR company, because we build HR software. We don't sell testing tools. And I really couldn't find anyone who had made this a business venture that seemed like they really knew what they were talking about. And so I walked away from there disappointed, but you got to go back into the real world, because just because you get to do a moonshot project doesn't mean that you don't need to keep the lights on, correct? And so when I came back down to earth, the company was saying, hey, you know what? It's great that you're going to work on a moonshot, but we have some challenges right now that we need to solve, And one of those is that we need to make sure we get a grasp of this mobile stuff. Like our mobile product is not up to par, and we really need to make sure that we take care of this. And so we need to make sure that we have a mobile testing strategy in place. And you're the test architect, so guess you get to multitask, right? So no problem. Mobile is a thing, of course. We all know mobile isn't going anywhere. And we all know that there's a lot of testing challenges when it comes to mobile. And so I said, well, let me do what I do best, which is before I start solving this problem, let me go and research what's out there. And so from that point, I got on a plane and I left Western Florida. I left Western Florida and headed up to Las Vegas to the Better Software Conference. And of course, this is a very cool place to go. It's in Vegas, Caesar's Palace. Any excuse to go to Vegas, I guess, right? But I was there on work. And, you know, I attended a talk by a gentleman named Jason Arbin, who at the time had a company, it's a startup company called AppDiff. And Jason was someone who had like some street cred, right? Like he didn't just wake up today and start talking about mobile, right? He had been at companies like Microsoft and Google and UTest. He'd written books on the subject and on testing, so he understood testing. And that was all good. I felt comfortable with what he was delivering on a mobile front. But then he started to show some things at the end of his presentation. He said he'd become very tired of the software testing industry and the way that we test software, and how manual it was, and how much of a pain it was, and how we had not really gone anywhere. And so his idea was to have a whole bunch of robots in the cloud trying to test the software automatically. Now remember, we were always on this moonshot ourselves, and I didn't find anyone who was doing what we were doing. And when Jason opened his mouth to start talking about these things, and I knew that he had some credibility, I was like, I need to go talk to this guy as soon as this talk is done. And so right after the talk, I went up and I told him, hey, we're working on this same problem back at Ultimate Software. We're not focused on mobile, we're focused on the web, but you're doing what I'm doing. It was like a little kid that finally got someone to play with him on the playground, you know? Like, here's my buddy. I got a buddy. Like, for the first time in this arena, I got a buddy that knows what he's talking about and is doing it. And we started to nerd out right there, talking about the challenges, talking about issues. He started just telling me all that he had went through and all the pain points, and I knew right away that he was the real deal. So that was wonderful. After that, Jason actually inspired me. Like finding that friend on the playground that was doing what I was doing got me so pumped up that I felt I needed to now go and inspire others. So I was inspired to inspire other people. And I went over to the Star West conference, and I just let it all out. I had a lightning talk, just 5 minutes, and I really just wanted to tell the testing community that we are lost. Like we don't have a clue what we're doing when it comes to technology. We're lost and we're way behind, and that testing is lost, and that we needed to bring back testing. And the only way we were going to bring back testing is if we started focusing on doing innovative things. And I didn't really realize what would happen when I finished this talk, because I finished the talk and I get off stage, and Jason is actually at this conference. Now, you saw the video. He's not a small dude, all right? So I get off stage, and he's there with his eyes dilated, staring at me like super pumped up. I thought my life was in danger at that point when I saw how pumped up he was, because whatever I did had now moved him in this space as well. And so when I talk to you about inspiration, it is about, first, we need to make sure that we are inspired ourselves and that we give that back to be able to inspire other people, because that inspiration is what starts, it's the catalyst to doing great things, right? All right, so now we're inspired. But inspiration always only goes so far. The next thing we have to be able to do, and our next chapter is about investing. And an investment is really something that we want to put down up front in hopes of getting some return later on. And so it's like that savings that we're putting in. And this is where a lot of companies don't do very well when it comes to our space. Because you would think that sense testing is so costly and so expensive that we should be putting some money aside to improving, not just getting by, but actually improving and cutting those costs and increasing efficiency. But we don't even do the bottom line that we need to do. Furthermore, go past that. And so, the good thing on my side was that Ultimate Software was investing. They were already investing in this moonshot. And we were chugging along, especially after I found Jason and I had someone to bounce ideas off of and just talk to about the issues and the challenges. And we were back in this wonderful building because we had grown, and we were chugging away at this project codenamed Pterodactyl. And I know what you're thinking, like, why in the world did we call it Pterodactyl? I don't know, I opposed, but the team kind of vetoed me at that point in time. And I guess someone who shall remain nameless, Dione, just named the folder Pterodactyl, and then all of a sudden that was a thing. So we had this huge project, and it was pretty cool. Pterodactyl was able to discover the application automatically and create a whole bunch of states, build a model of that application. Didn't have to feed it anything except the URL to this application. And then it could do things like generate tests. It could interact with the application. It could click buttons. It could check for error messages. It could do all this stuff. So we had a good little prototype going, but better than anything else, Pterodactyl could learn. And even though it might suck at first at doing something, it would get better. And that's the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we were applying this in the context of our applications, and we were talking about enterprise applications. So you can imagine trying to discover an enterprise application, you have to build this huge model. And you have to have a way to deal with the complexity and to drill down into these different states to make sure that the model that you're discovering is actually correct. And we were doing that with a lot of cool technology because, you know, we're technologists. And Pterodactyl could discover the applications that we had built. Now, it might not be able to discover every application that you throw at it, but for our purposes, it was a start. And so the next natural thing is that we need to think about how do we actually take that model, take that information, and start generating tests. And we were able to do that as well. We were able to automatically analyze that application and generate test sequences, fill out forms with test data, use testing techniques, and get results. And we could drill into these results and see the techniques that were employed, and also see what steps these bots were taking along the way. It was pretty impressive, because even though we still had a far ways to go, because we weren't necessarily solving all of these hard challenges like the Oracle, it was at least a start. Like, it could tell if something failed, and if it blew up in your face, if you had a 404 error or something obviously went wrong, it could tell certain things. And furthermore, like, we could understand it as humans because we built in all of that instrumentation into the application. But then we had a hard challenge because we still needed to face those hard problems, right? Like, how do you get the system to learn from things like requirements? And we said, okay, well, we got our requirements written in Jira, we got product analysts and business analysts, and let's just start. Let's just try to build something that can interpret natural language and see what we can do, build in mechanisms so that the analyst could start to train these things and say, hey, you know what, this sentence means this or it means that, and go through that whole process. And with the goal of training it to understand those things and then hoping that we could generate tests that are meaningful. And this was the hardest part. It was definitely the hardest part, and still remains the hardest part. And, well, quite frankly, it didn't work that well. We had some challenges with training the system and getting people to use the system to train it to make it better. It was just a little bit of a mess. So we had a good foundation of things, but we weren't really solving this moonshot, right? But it's important to remember that as you go through things, you need to make sure that you have that feedback. And we were having quick turnaround episodes with a team to allow us to determine like how to use the system, if it was working well. And, you know, there were some wins, as you would expect. Like I mentioned, we had that foundation of things. We could explore the application automatically, which was a big win. And then when we came to execute, we had detailed steps that we could go and look at, and it was very debuggable, right? We could even rerun some of those tests and get the system back into that state. But where we had a lot of issues, where we're scaling this thing, it was very memory intensive, very heavy on that. When it came to doing more complex things like deep data generation of complex data, testing techniques, there were still gaps there. And then that trainability issue that I was talking about was a huge, huge issue and problem. But remember, you can shoot for the moon and miss, and it's okay. Because if you shoot for the moon and miss, you might land on a star, right? And you might learn something in the process, and it might help the next person get to the moon. And we weren't really about trying to solve this on our own, because we knew that this problem was a huge problem. And so we were also investing in getting others to help us. And so Ultimate was investing in universities like FIU and the University of North Texas, Dallas, and we were sponsoring their software testing labs and asking them, hey, could you get some graduate students to work on this stuff? That would be great. And we had their faculty, Peter Clark, and we started to work on these problems collectively with their students. So Peter Clark and Renee Bryce from UNT got some students together, and they were working on these problems, and we were learning from whatever they were doing. And it was very cool because, you know, as life would have it, we would hire one of their students onto our team. Worked out for him, worked out for us. And then we had one of our own who would decide that after doing this, this seems like a good area to pursue a master's degree. And so Dione became a student. Then he said, okay, I got the master's, now I might as well do a PhD. And so we had a small little community and academic industry collaboration going, which was wonderful. And we were able to make a lot of progress. We had like 4 different projects running where we were looking at things like self-testing microservices. We were trying to train a bot to be like a domain expert. We were also looking at how to generate tests at a very high level using different machine learning approaches and doing things like stepping into mobile and trying to see if that could be something that would help us, since we had our mobile product and our mobile strategy under our belts. So we saw an opportunity to merge those things. And so we had investment, we had our inspiration, and so naturally, this innovation started to come forth, right? It is like where those ideas become reality. Because that inspiration coupled with investment, with people that really care about their field and understand it, which is also part of the investment, to take those people's time and say, hey, you know what? We know you could test features all day long, but we need you all to start thinking about the future of testing, is what leads to these things that are very innovative. And in 2018, we started to see a lot of that progress. We started to see that we could build a system like the one on the left that could do exploratory testing, that these bots just drill into this thing and start testing. Meanwhile, Jason was making progress on mobile, and his bots were doing exploratory testing on mobile. And there were two very different solutions, and we would share how we did this. And furthermore, we wanted to make sure that we could start sharing with a broader community, because we also both recognized that ourselves, we couldn't solve these problems. Like, we couldn't solve these problems by ourselves, and we needed to start forming a community to help solve these issues. And a lot of things had to come together to be able to do this from our side. We had that pterodactyl project, we had that self-testing and that agent-based framework type stuff. We had that domain expert. We had a lot of learning and abstract learning. We had an underlying framework based on Selenium that helped us to interact with the system under test. And then we even started looking at performance testing and incorporating that. And so that innovation kind of started to propel in 2018. And we ended up with a rather intricate system that could coordinate various agents throughout the system. And we talked about this during the tutorial, and start doing testing. Like, these agents were autonomous, intelligent, and they were able to just start testing software, generating test cases on their own, and doing interesting things like deduplicating those tests and making sure that they're doing efficient testing. And we were feeling pretty good about ourselves. Very complex system, but one that worked and that served as an example that other people could use and other people could look at as a reference. And so we thought, well, what better to do with a system like this than to make it freely available to everyone, right? We're not going to solve the problem ourselves, and we've done a lot of work on Pterodactyl, so at least we could do is, like, from our learnings from Pterodactyl, open source a project on GitHub called Agent. And Agent is out there for people to grab. And Jason was like-minded. He said, you know what, we've built a lot of classifiers and things that we could train, and he himself hooked up with Jonathan Lips to get part of his framework and his work into Appium for everyone to consume. And so we had these two open source projects in the area of AI for testing as a result of a lot of our investments. So you can now look up elements by using AI. Like, how cool is that, right? At least I thought it was pretty cool, but, you know, I'm nerdy. And in everything we did, because I still had those academic roots, we were publishing. We filed patents. Like, this has to be the output of this thing, because, like, we're doing something novel and innovative, and we want to make sure that it's recognized as such. And we were becoming industry leaders. Like, we started an association around this problem of AI for software testing. We held a virtual conference. We created a tutorial. We created a second tutorial that was held here just the other day, because we're trying to stimulate the innovation in our field in software testing. And AI is here, like, it's here to stay. And we were able to witness some of the coolest things. So we had our tutorial one day, and we had like 70 testers in the room. Now I have like 700 people, so I won't try this experiment here, because I guess 700 people may get angrier than 70 people if the bots beat them at something. But the bots beat them at a simple problem, which was how do we test if an application is trustworthy? You know, this is not one of these simple automation issues, right? This is this kind of qualitative type of problem that is very, you know, user judgment type, touchy-feely kind of thing. And so we asked that question, and 70 testers were pretty stumped as to what they would do to see if the application was trustworthy. Until someone said, oh, you know what, I think I'd look for, you know, funny symbols or foreign characters if it was like in the English App Store or the US App Store. And then it took like another 2-3 minutes before someone said something else. But the machines, after just taking a bunch of examples and getting humans to label them trustworthy or not trustworthy and doing an experiment, were able to tell us like that and even give us a number, a measure as to how trustworthy an application is. And so we were starting to see the machines do things that we thought they couldn't do, number one, and then they were doing them quicker than humans. And so it's just very promising what we were doing and what we were looking at. And there's a lot more since then. These are just some of the early things that happened back then. And we went all over the world, from Tokyo to Budapest, my favorite, just to say, talking about this stuff and sharing it. And people were interested in trying to get on board and trying to get started, as many of you are. And then we started to get awards. You know, I saw my peeps starting to get awards for innovation, for best paper, best presentation. And then I got an award myself. I got this award from my alma mater, FIU, and a lady called me and said, hey, we want to give you a Torch Award. I didn't know what a Torch Award was. So of course I go to the wonderful Google, and I just said, well, let me look up what these Torch Awards are. I had let months go by without preparing for it. And I click the website, and I see this. And I'm like, wow, this looks like the Grammys. This is not, you know, I don't like the spotlight. Like, the spotlight is not something that I like to do. I know that's ironic because I'm here and there's like 4 spotlights in my face. But spotlights are not my thing. And I realized that this was a big deal. And so what did I do? As a good leader would do, I told all of my peeps that had helped me get this award to get their tuxedos because they're going with me, because I didn't do this by myself, right? And so we had a blast at the Torch Awards. And if you didn't know, now you know that FIU, Florida International University, they know how to party. They really know how to party. So, you know, you got to work harder and you got to play harder. And we did that as part of this. We enjoyed it every single step of the way. And coming up to present day, we still are having fun. I got another award for Coach of the Year. And guess who I got to meet? Udonis Haslem from the Miami Heat. Like, it was crazy. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, this was the right time to get an award when we have an NBA superstar that needs to take a picture with me. I mean, I'm going to look short anyway, so it doesn't matter, because next to Adam, I look short. But how cool is that? And I started to see this ripple effect. Remember the inspire, and then the invest, and then the innovate? Well, it's kind of like a cycle. Like, I started to see that ripple effect still continue, where we were getting award after award, and the awards would come from academia, and then they'd come from industry. So we got a Best Paper Award at the first IEEE International Conference for AI testing, and that was the best industry paper. And then I started to see those peeps that were working under us start to benefit from that ripple effect. So one of our architects, Keith Briggs, just presented at the PNSQC conference on using these same agents to do accessibility testing, extending that framework. And it just kept going and going. Our performance team, back at home base, they started to automate. And when I say automate, I mean truly automate. Like, what we were using very expensive performance engineers to script and do load runner scripting, they started to do automatic test generation for performance tests and did a proof of concept and ran that all the way through. And hopefully by the end of the year, or at least by Q1 next year, they would have automated their complete regression and saved a lot of money in doing so. We started to see those students that we invested in at FIU also gain benefits, presenting their poster papers and their research at industry conferences and academic conferences, and also seeing our peeps do things internally and externally. Because as we were building these things and we were thinking about AI, we were also using other technologies like microservices and having to figure out how to do testing on them, and then being able to use that to lead the industry in microservices testing strategies. And so Justin Phillips did a lot of work along those lines. He's one of our technical leads. and was able to actually help me create a tutorial and deliver it as well. And so this effect on our peeps just kept going and going and going, because it resonated that when we did this inspire, invest, and innovate, it actually transformed our culture in our organization. And Philip Day here is not presenting about AI, he's not presenting about microservices, he's presenting about our quality of culture that stemmed from this Q equals P, because that's where it came from initially. It came from all the way back there with a leader that thought that quality equals productivity. And it continues. So I couldn't go to Germany because I needed to be here. What a hard life that must be, right? But we got a paper accepted in Berlin and at a very good academic conference this time. And so one of our colleagues, Patrick Alt, is going to be presenting that tomorrow. So when I tell you that this formula, this theme that we have of inspire, invest, and innovate is a very personal theme, I mean it. Because you're going to see the fruits of those tomorrow when Diony gives his keynote. It continues to happen and it continues to propagate. And it's much bigger than just building a tool. Like the impact of it is a lot far-reaching than building a framework or doing something like that. It transforms your people, because I've been able to see all of those people grow on their career paths, in their public speaking, in so many other areas that you just don't anticipate. I myself wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. And so we can't stop this with what happened up to now. We have to think about the future. And we're at that point. We're at this conference and you guys have a choice. You have a choice with what you do when you come here and you listen to these talks and you take these things back, and what you may or may not do with them. Because I've seen that we get very excited when we come to conferences, right? And we're thrilled while we're here and the atmosphere is there, and then we go back and then it's like, okay, now to try to find the energy to do this, and now, oh, the reality of the day-to-day hits and we don't get time. So how do we really get our leaders to stop and recognize this thing? And I was fortunate that we had a leader that started there and that propagated. But I've seen situations and I've been in situations, and even now, like if you don't try to maintain that culture, it goes away. But there's things that you can do to help stimulate that culture. Because even if your organization doesn't have that philosophy now, if you can get to be part of a community that's doing those things and start innovating and start showing value, well, guess what the business people like? They like money. And if you can save them a bunch of money through an innovative testing technique or a new tool or a new framework or a new process, well, they will be your friends and they will support you, and you might just end up changing their minds. And so if we step into the future a little bit and look at what Gartner is saying, Gartner is saying that if we look 2 years down the line, 30% of application development organizations will have some sort of AI-enabled test automation that's supporting their DevOps process. And so this AI thing is here to stay. Furthermore, I know that many of you are probably already working in organizations that are trying to use and apply machine learning to their problems. And so we are very much needed. We're very much needed in this space. And more than that, this whole idea of artificial intelligence and machine learning and its application to software testing is putting us in a position that we've needed to be in for a long time. We've needed to start to wake up and stop doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results, right? We have to start to do something different. If we don't do something different, the same thing will continue to happen, and that's where our field starts to stagnate. And for the first time, I'm looking at a landscape in which testing and test automation is propelling ahead of development. in terms of our tools. Because when you look at some of these reports, either from Gartner or Capgemini, and they start talking about where AI is being applied in software engineering, testing is in the front right now. Testing is in the front. Testing is never in the front. Testing is always the last thing that anyone ever talks about or cares about. So for us to be in the front means that we need to grab that opportunity to stay in the front. And it starts with us. It starts here at this conference, where you guys have an opportunity to hear from these speakers on how to inspire yourselves, how to inspire others, how to invest in this discipline, and how to start innovating. And what better place than Budapest? I came here for the first time last year at HUSTEF, and I realized that this was a great place to be. And yesterday affirmed that again, because I've never been in a room of like 100 people and kind of finished what I had to say, and the room is getting all warm and everything, and people don't want to leave because they want to ask questions and questions and questions. Like, that is a testament to the environment that we're building here and the community that we're building here. Like, this conference has arrived. It is definitely on the map, and that is because of you guys. And so I encourage you, as we step through this, to really embrace this theme of the conference and to think about it and think about how you can apply it to your world. Because we're all dealing with different situations, but when we talk to each other at conferences like this, we start to realize that other people are going through it too, or maybe we aren't that bad back at home base as I thought we were, because other people are having a worse time, which is somehow that kind of makes us feel a little bit better, although it shouldn't, right? Other people are suffering more than we are, but it is what it is, right? So embrace that time, like, and just know, like, there's a light coming. Now, I get to come up here and I get to talk about all these wonderful things, but I didn't do any of this by myself. There's a lot of people along the way that I owe credit to, and you have to give them the credit where credit is due. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is that even though, like, this is a story that I told you about how I came up with this theme and resonated it throughout the conference and how it impacted my life, but we're just in the middle of it, or probably still at the very early stages, if I dare to say. And so this story is not done. And actually, it's just beginning. And your story is also just beginning. So I encourage you, please attend the talks, have fun, come and discuss, come and talk, ask questions, and then please go back and do something great with what you learn here, and then come back and share your story at the next HUSTEF. Submit a call for proposal and share your story. First time story, like you'll see. No one knew me 4 years ago, and now everyone seems to know me and want me at their conference. And I didn't expect that to happen. And sometimes we think that people are natural-born speakers. I'm not a natural-born speaker at all. But I've learned to enjoy this community and to start to embrace the fact that we can do better testing. Thank you. So do you believe that because of self-testing software, the tester's role will become redundant one day? All right. So I know when Diony gives his keynote, he will clarify a lot of this stuff, because we always worry about whether or not we're going away, we're getting redundant, we're getting replaced, and all this stuff. I think that as long as there's software, there'll be a need for software testers. There'll always be a need for software testers. I think, like any technology that we have, as technology comes, it changes the way that we do things. And certain things become obsolete, but people don't become obsolete. Like, we don't really have payphones much anymore in a lot of places, and now, you know, the cell phone has made a lot of that go away. People were worried about the whole taxi cab situation. Now with Uber, they're suffering. Like, technology just changes the way that we interact with the world, right? And it can transform the world. And I think that just like software has transformed the world, artificial intelligence is going to transform software, which is in essence transforming the world again. And so self-testing software will change the way that we validate and that we interact with the system, and certain things that we thought we couldn't automate are going to be able to be automated. But we're always going to play a role in the validation of that software at some point. So that's what I would answer to that. All right, in this new world of testing, in your opinion, which skills become more important for test engineers to have in the future? Okay, so a lot of people like to say like this artificial intelligence and machine learning stuff is going to replace a lot of the low-hanging fruit, and that's all it's going to replace. I actually don't think that it's just going to replace low-hanging fruit. I think things that we thought were hard are going to start to be able to be done, because AI and machine learning is really simulating human judgment, right? And that's why like things like the trustworthiness problem or usability action is going to be able to be solved. We can drive cars using AI, right? So what makes us think that we can't replace some aspects of testing? But I think that the skills that we bring to the table and that we always bring to the table is that critical thinking, right? Because like machines are doing things based on human judgment, right? But the humans have to train that machine to have that judgment. And we make decisions and we do things based on our gut feel that sometimes we can't explain. And the machines can't really do that without us, right? They just can't do that without us training the machine. So I think the critical thinking, I think even all these things with technical skills, with automation, aren't going to be that useful anymore, because now the tools are becoming even more sophisticated that it's becoming easy for someone to use and interact with AI. And you don't need all these technical skills. Of course, if you're going to try to develop these types of systems, you need technical skills, but we're seeing the level of abstraction get raised to the point that even people that don't have technical skills can use some of these tools. So I think more of that critical thinking as opposed to your technical skills are going to be needed. Where or when can we find a demo, or how can we give a try of Pterodactyl? So the answer is nowhere. Nowhere can you find the source code for Pterodactyl. You can find the source code for Agent, which kind of slices out a part of that. But we don't know if we're going to ever open source Pterodactyl. We're not sure about that yet. We still have a lot to go with it, and it's still very focused on our products. But you never know. We'll see. But no demo right now. So let me see if I can get to one or two more. How different is your vision of 2024 than your vision of 2020 was back in 2016? So my visions are pretty sucky, I can tell you that. I think that my visions are actually a little slower than reality. Like, I actually see us moving faster in this day and age. And not us meaning our company, but I'm seeing other things happen in the artificial intelligence and machine learning world that if we just pick them up and apply them to testing, that they would be actually a lot further along than we are right now. So I think I'm pretty off, but I think that like I believe that things are further away than they are, and I think that things are actually catching up. All right, last one here. Can you share a concrete example of how right to left thinking improved your decision making today? So I think really the answer to that is like I believe like it helped me to not have a lot of fear about things. I'm not a very fearful person, but I'm also still like a tester at heart, so I'm very pessimistic that things will work and turn out. And when you're doing research, you have to kind of switch that off a little bit and feel okay if you fail, but dream about getting it done and forgetting about it being impossible, and that the only thing that is impossible is just something that hasn't been done yet, right? And that's why we're calling it impossible. So that's it.